Hello and welcome. You are listening to an informed take on current events brought to you by law students and staff of Queen's University, Belfast. This is LawPod.
Hi everyone and welcome to LawPod. I'm Rachel Killeen, a lecturer in the School of Law here at Queen's University, Belfast. So today we are switching gears a little bit from our usual themes and turning our gaze inwards to think about the role of higher education and universities in perpetuating but also potentially resisting white supremacy and structural racism. So following the tragic murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor by police officers in the US, you'll have seen in the media that protests and riots are swiftly spreading through the US. And while protests following racist police brutality are not new, this current wave of global solidarity and uprising against white supremacy in the US and beyond feels particularly urgent. So, in the wake of this movement, students at higher education institutions across the UK and Ireland have been speaking out about their experiences of racism and racial inequality. And here at Queen's, we're no exception to that. And last month, we saw the African Caribbean Society send an open letter to our Chancellor and Vice Chancellor where they highlighted the racism they have experienced and questioned the adequacy of the university's actions to combat that institutional racism. So I thought it would be important for us to reflect on these events and their broader implications. And to do so, I'm pleased to welcome to LawPod two guests with significant experience in advocating for Black, Asian, and minority ethnic students here at Queen's. So first, I would like to welcome Oluwayomi Olaide-Kolapo. Yomi is a final year master's student and he's studying structural engineering with architecture. And for our purposes, it's most important to note that he is the president of the African Caribbean Society. So hello, Yomi, and thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Rachel. Thanks for having me today.
No, our pleasure. And then second, I would like to welcome Hamsavani Rajeswaren. And Hamza has been twice elected the Equality and Diversity Officer in the Queen's Student Union, and she finished her most recent term just at the end of June past. And so in this role, she has campaigned for inclusive education for all, for investigations into the BAME attainment gap, and for the decolonisation of the institution. So hello, Hamza. Welcome to LawPod.
Hi, thank you for having me.
No, again, our pleasure. So, yeah, we're delighted to have you both here today. And to start us off, Yomi, I wonder if you could maybe begin the conversation by telling us a little bit about the African Caribbean Society's decision to send the letter and maybe highlight some of the demands that were contained within it.
Yeah, sure. Once again, thanks for having me on the podcast. And I think it's very important that this kind of discussion is, had around the university, just to increase in awareness and to, increase the education that people have about what's going on. So in terms of like, giving background to giving background to our open letter, um, it kind of stemmed. So we all know it started from like the George Floyd incident that happened in America, and um, then some acts of solidarity started coming about. One of which was the Blackout Tuesday that happened on the 2nd of June, and at this point nobody was really focused on what the university was doing. Everybody was kind of like engrossed in the whole act of racism around the world and whatnot. But then to our amazement, it was quite disappointing to see despite not putting out anything before the Blackout Tuesday, that the university on their Instagram page posted a black square with no context or anything. And this kind of infuriated us, and kind of felt like this was just like performative solidarity. And it was at this point we realized that the university is not innocent, in terms of how it handles racism. And this kind of led to us putting out the open letter on the 4th of June. Um, in the open letter, we had specific demands. We wanted the university to invest in decolonizing the institution. We wanted the university to also invest and research the BAME attainment gap. And we also wanted them to invest in culturally competent mental health policies and services. So these were amongst part of our demands, and this is what we were hoping that the university would take on board. In response to our open letter, the vice chancellor did respond shortly after, and he said that he was deeply concerned that we as Black students have faced this kind of racism, and but in his response, he did not touch on specific things that we had touched on in our letter. The vice chancellor's unwillingness to use the word black, and results to BAME, was kind of concerning a little bit um, in the letter, and in his university-wide communication as well. Um, it was a step in the right direction, I would say. It showed that the university was in a way ready to listen to us and ready to take us seriously. But like I said before, there was still some stuff that were not touched on, and there was no real commitment to action, and that was quite concerning for us as well as a body. Certain things in the letter, kind of made us raise an eyebrow. For example, stating in the university-wide communication that Black History Month was in November, when across the UK and Ireland for many many years, Black History Month has been celebrated in October. Just little things like this kind of like made us raise an eyebrow and wonder, is the university really taking what we our demands seriously, or are they actually just trying to be celebrated for small little actions that they take. So that's probably a bit of background to the whole open letter that we released, and the whole issue of racism in Queens.
Thank you, Yomi. And you went on to talk a little bit about the Vice Chancellor's response there, and you mentioned the risks of this kind of performative solidarity. And I wondered if you could just say a little bit more about that and what the risks are, in addition to masking inaction of these kind of performative solidarity actions.
Yeah, so when we see performative solidarity, from the person who's issuing this solidarity, it might seem like they are, taking an action, and it might seem like a way of them, showing that they are in support. But to the people, to the subject, it's very glaring and very clear that what's happening is performative solidarity, and it kind of comes across a little bit like, would I say, an insult, or like probably like a slap in the face, saying like, okay, these people are not really taking us seriously. It's probably like an attempt to, in a way, pacify the subjects of the racism. So what that inherently does is it makes those of us who are like requesting for demands and action to be taken to lose trust in the process, to lose trust in the systems that we should trust and we should believe that are there to help us. So yeah, like it brings about a lack of trust in the authorities that they are not really taking us seriously, and yeah, it just brings about a lack of trust basically.
Yeah, yeah, and thank you for that. I wonder then if we maybe just go into a little bit more detail about some of the specific demands that you had asked and that you had raised. So, one of the issues that is highlighted in the letter is this critique of Queen's University's focus on internationalizing the curriculum rather than decolonising the curriculum. And Hamza, I know that you have also focused on both of these approaches in your role as Equality and Diversity Officer, but you have also critiqued Queen's focus on internationalisation. And I wonder if you would maybe unpick the distinction between these two approaches for those in the audience that might be less familiar with these terms.
Yes, absolutely, Rachel. So something that the university has really been focusing on over the past good few years, to be honest, has been internationalization. International students obviously bring in a large chunk of income into the university because we pay fees that ranges anywhere between £12,000 to over £30,000 per year for each year of our courses. And so increasing the number of international students has been a big focus of the university's corporate plans. And you'll see in Vision 2020, the university's previous corporate plan, it was a huge part of their aims was to increase the student population, and it was quite a big jump they were looking at as well. So as part of internationalization, something that I've worked on is is really looking at, obviously we do want to bring more international students onto campus. The diversity and the wealth of knowledge that international students can bring to our campus is really amazing and something we want to see. But what we're not addressing is the experiences of these international students and their student experience once they do get here. In terms of decolonizing education, decolonization is much more of a radical approach. It's looking at liberating our education system, and the education system, especially in the UK, is deeply rooted in racism. Historically, higher education spaces weren't built for Black students, weren't built for students of color, and so decolonizing our institutions is a much more radical approach at reshaping what our education looks like, and it's also very much building a liberated and anti-racist education system that intrinsically includes racial justice for students, staff, and workers within the institution. Higher education institutions in the UK are very much vested in a racist and xenophobic climate, both of the wider society as well as other universities, and the marketization of higher education reduces the university's responsibilities towards its workers. Decolonizing education really means democratizing, and that is talking about transformative change. And we know that's not going to happen through getting a seat at the table, but by really leveraging student worker power against institutions, and to put control back in the hands of the people of the university, and to have actual democratic structures of accountability for our senior management, for our Senate, and also looking at the corporate interests of the university, and bringing it back to what it matters, which is our education, student and staff centered learning spaces. So internationalization essentially is something that's very much part of the marketization and corporatization of the higher education system in the UK. And so decolonization in itself doesn't match up with the word internationalization at its core, because decolonization talks about confronting these processes, and shutting down, using universities as spaces for marketized education systems, but rather reshaping our universities into spaces that where students and staff can actually organize for radical change, and not just narrowly consider matters of curriculum or diversity tactics.
Yeah, so if I understand you, then it's about much more than just the actual learning experience, but also speaks to the heart of the role of a higher education institution in the society in which it's operating.
Absolutely. I think so many people don't necessarily see the university as a space that's meant to be for knowledge production, and that is meant to be a very inspiring space for students and staff to exist within. But the reality of our university today is that it's very much a space that is so vested in marketization that it's not looking at the interests of the people that make up the university. And so decolonization really talks about refocusing all of that, and confronting the power structures that have turned universities into what they are today.
Mm. A link to that, I suppose, I'd been reading about the work of Mel's Owusu, who had been crowdfunding in order to set up a free Black university. So she had talked about a university with the goals of imagining transformative worlds and redistributing knowledge and readings and engaging the radical Black imagination. And it seems to resonate with what you're saying. It seems to come from this decolonized position. But her statement was that she had come to the conclusion that you cannot transform a university from the inside, and that instead we have to look to alternative structures outside the university. I wonder what your thoughts are on that, and whether, maybe just reflecting on your experience at Queen's, is it possible to decolonise an existing structure, or does the answer lie elsewhere?
So, in my time at Queen's, I've done a lot of work around decolonizing the curriculum, the institution. I prefer saying institution because I don't think the curriculum in itself is going to fix the problem. But absolutely, I'm with Mel's when they say that there is no space within the structures that we exist within. It's become so clear that the current education system is so broken that there is no space for this work. We can try to fix things as much as we can, but as it stands, as long as we are working within the power structures that are built to keep us out, um, as Black students and students of color, then there is really, we need more radical spaces and radical opportunities for building a truly anti-racist space for ourselves. And yeah, I'm absolutely with Mel on the fact that I don't think that this necessarily is the way forward anymore. But I do think that it's important for universities to confront their complicity in racism. I think it's important for decolonize campaigns that are student and staff led on the ground within universities. I think it's important for us to confront what the difference between diversity and decolonization is. And I also think it's very important for universities to continue doing their best to actually radically transform themselves into spaces that students and staff of color can be proud of and can actually feel like they are part of. And so, I do think that there is an onus on universities to do these things, but the Free Black University is an idea that's beyond the confines of universities. And I think no matter how much we try to change a university, there will be still confines. And Mel's work on the Free Black University talks about something that's so refreshingly radical and is a space that's built for Black people and Black academics. And it's her 10-point plan talks about open access and making sure that there's like a free and expansive library of radical readings. They talk about delivering conferences and free and accessible education centered on the freedom of Black people and things like that. And that's something I think there needs just a separate space for, because Black students and Black academics have been oppressed and silenced for so long. There are going to be things that universities can do to fix these problems, but we're talking, these are really long-term approaches. Our university spaces are not going to become anti-racist, inclusive, and these things that are not going to happen overnight. The Free Black University is a space that is built for Black academics and Black students to be able to heal from the racial trauma that the higher education system poses on them. And so yeah, I think it's a fantastic idea, and the work that Mel's is doing is really incredible. They've really honestly done some amazing things. And to be honest, as someone who's now able to look back at my work within Queen's and talking about decolonization within Queen's, I really, really hope that the university senior management looks into investing in Black academics' experiences and interests, and donating to the Free Black University.
Thank you, Hamza. And I think what you're highlighting there about the need to both explore alternatives elsewhere, but also, continue to keep our gaze on the current institutions that we have, links to another issue that was highlighted in the letter, and that was the importance of placing Black and minority students and staff at the heart of initiatives to decolonise institutions. And Hamza, you've also spoken about the importance of student-led change. So I guess a question for both of you is how universities can best support Black and minority students in leading change without falling into the trap of basically overburdening marginalised communities with the task of dismantling their own oppression. So Yomi, maybe first, I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
So what I think, so I'll just refer back to like a conversation I had, with someone I know within the university, and the person basically highlighted the fact that Queens would spend money on consulting, for other things, things that are not, let's say, that are not with regards to the Black Lives Matter thing right now. So what they could do basically in this regard would be, if Queens is happy to, spend money on consulting fees, for somebody, for an expert in a certain field, let's say, for example, well-being, they could spend money on to pay a consultant in terms of well-being. I think a step in the right direction would be also to, pay someone like a consultant, out there, who could advise the university in the best way possible to kind of, in terms of like the ways to go about and decolonizing the institution. In like with students, obviously you don't want to overburden students because we are paying to be educated in the university, and we're probably not paying to teach the university their job or show the university what they're doing. But like I guess the students could in a way recommend, if they know like people out there who are great in these kind of roles, who are great in consulting, who are knowledgeable and know what to do in terms of decolonizing the institution, I guess. So that would be my my take on that.
Yeah, thank you. And Hamza, do you have anything you would want to add to that?
I think Yomi said some really important things there, and I really do believe that work needs to be centered on the Black voices and Black student experience, I guess, in the university as well. But it is a very tricky thing to balance doing this work with centering their voices without overburdening them. But the way I see it, it's I've had to do this in my work as well, where, it's very important to me that I center the voices of liberation groups in whatever work I've done during my time in the SU. Um, but I've always looked at it as, using my platform and my role and the power that I had in that position to center their voices and their wants for change in the university or in wider society, and do what I can in my power through my role to amplify their voices, to tackle the changes that they would like to see. And so, not making students and staff from those backgrounds do the emotional labor, but rather listening to them and centering their voices, and in this case, the demands of the ACS letter um, in the work that the university does going forward, which I think for me personally, reading the Vice Chancellor's letter didn't necessarily come through in sort of a solid commitment.
Yeah, yeah. It comes back to that notion of performativity then, and the difference between making a declaration that sounds right compared to actually doing the work, essentially.
Yeah, I think it's important, um, both in terms of the university, but also just in wider conversations, both about decolonizing practices, and just anti-racism. It's important for allies to realize how exhausting these conversations are. Um, a lot of what's happened over the past month has been, Black students and Black staff putting their trauma out for people to see. The things that were raised in that open letter um, were honestly so painful to read for me personally. It felt like as a university, we have failed our students. And that is a very powerful emotion, I think, that came from the letter for me. And so I hope that people reading it, people in senior management, people in positions of power, to actually, you know, radically change the way we're approaching these conversations, um, you know, do get that wake up call, because a lot of this has been pain and trauma that Black students and staff have been putting out to the world to see, in hopes that people will wake up. But also, I don't think enough is being recognized in that all of this pain and trauma is exhausting, for people to have to put out for the world to see. And as allies, we need to be doing better. We need to do more to support our Black siblings in their fights, and use our platforms as allies, to do that.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think what you're saying there about this, you know, feeling that people have to share their trauma and these difficult things that have happened to them in order to affect change links into another thing that was raised by the letter is particularly important, which is the need for culturally competent mental health services. And I know, Hamza, that connects to your own work on mental health as a liberation issue. So I wanted to ask you both a bit about that. You know, what does it mean for mental health services to be culturally competent? And why is that so important in higher education in particular? So Yomi, maybe you could talk a little bit about that particular issue in the letter.
Yeah, sure. So I'll start off by saying, by quoting basically. So basically, during this whole Black Lives Matter stuff and the whole open letter case, we had some events on Instagram, so IG Live TV on Instagram, and one of the um, ladies who was speaking to us, told us basically how the university has in the past, dealt with reports on racism, and I quote: "These students come from rural backgrounds and universities their first exposure to ethnic diversity. We believe punitive action will remove their learning opportunities as they can use these experiences to grow." So from that kind of response, so I don't know how I, as a black student, would trust this system to again go and report any case of racism, or report that I'm feeling a bit marginalized because of my skin color. If this is the kind of response that I'm getting back, you know, if I was to take this response, what this would mean to me as a student would be that, you know, the money I'm paying doesn't really matter. I'm paying, if I'm coming as an international student, I'm paying, close to north of £20,000 to study, but I'm not paying £20,000 to come and have to put up with racism from, people, if that makes sense. So I feel like if we have culturally competent well-being services, I feel like the way, the way we will be able to report, racism or issues of racism would be a lot easier for us, and there'll be more trust in the system. Because to be fair, it's hard to narrate your experience of racism to someone who can't really relate to that kind of experience that you've had, or somebody who in who in themselves, has what's the word now? Sorry, I'm just trying to think of the word. They have a privilege, basically.
Mm.
Reporting, my racism I've experienced to somebody who is privileged, because of the color of their skin. So I feel like if the university, invest in, culturally competent well-being services, I feel like, everybody would feel a little bit more comfortable to go and speak to these well-being services, if that makes sense. Somebody you can easily relate to, and not being, met with a response like, the students come from rural backgrounds, so just let them be, let them grow, while I have to put up with the racism, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It makes sense. And it's an unfortunate kind of privileging of certain experiences over others, and, placing the learning over actual direct suffering seems to be massively disconnected to the student experience. And it seems to me from what you're saying there is there's two parts to this then, because part of it is about sensitivity training and making sure people that are in these positions understand diverse experiences, but also having people in those services who perhaps have diverse experiences themselves rather than, grounded in only one particular worldview and one particular background.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, we could look at it from that point of view. So, if it is a case where there is difficulty in finding people who have had these experiences or who have this similar background, then it comes to a case of training these people on how, or making them understand that the experiences that they would have with not with, what I was about to say normal, not normal people, the experiences that they have with locals, I guess, it's not the same experiences that you would have with international students. So then, how they handle, you know, mental health services and how they handle the well-being of these people, because a lot of it might come from being from little microaggressions and stuff like that. That takes a very large toll on someone's mental health, microaggressions, because you can't actively speak out against it, but you know it's happening, but you yourself, you have to deal with it yourself because of fear of people calling you out for overreacting or stuff like that. So it's, yeah, there could, if, like I said, if there's a difficulty in finding people who have had these diversity experiences, then it then comes down to training the people in these services to be able to deal with a diverse culture in the university, I guess.
Yeah, thank you for that. And Hamza, I wonder if you want to add anything to that or talk about your work on mental health as a liberation issue in particular.
Yeah, so I think I think what is really important for me in this is that um obviously Yomi's raised a lot of points based on like personal experiences, and before I started my role as Ecuador University Officer in the SU, something that I really, really struggled navigating was conversations around mental health within the university as a student of color. I think within the higher education, system within Queens in itself, like mental health has been a really big conversation over the past couple of years. There is a student mental health crisis within higher education. However, a lot of what's being done, a lot of the approaches that are being used to address the issues are so far removed from um, the experiences that students of color have, but also just, and this is why I phrased it as looking at mental health as a liberation issue. Students from marginalized backgrounds have very different experiences of mental health because, and like Yomi said, the racism that we face, or the discrimination that LGBT students face, or sexism that women might face, or disableism that disabled students face, that trauma impacts us very differently. On top of the factors for the mental health issues that students face, on top of the financial issues that cause us mental health issues, the housing um, crisis as well that's really affecting student mental health at the minute. All of these things, on top of the fact that we come from these liberation backgrounds, um, and hold that trauma of navigating university spaces, and for me that is existing in a classroom of over 120 students with three students of color, um, was really really tough for me. And like Yomi said, you don't feel like you can speak about your experiences. You don't feel like the people that you have to talk to about these experiences within the structures that we have currently are going to be able to understand you, resonate with you, or remotely even take you seriously sometimes. um, I know we have a really robust you know work that's being done right now around reporting and supporting, and that's fantastic. But the thing is, our staff populations, especially in departments like well-being, are not representative of the student populations, especially of the student population that currently isn't very well engaged with conversations on mental health. um, and so when I started my role in the SU, it was very important for me that we start talking about mental health as a liberation issue, to talk about the additional trauma that students from these marginalized backgrounds have in accessing mental health. And I want to be able to see that reflected in the policies that the university is taking forward on mental health right now, because I know the university is doing a lot of work around it. There's the institutional framework that's currently being put together. And to me, that's a perfect opportunity to actually see a real tangible commitment to culturally competent mental health care services. And like Yobi said, that can be easily achieved through training, through employing more staff of color, um, and through actually making an effort to try and see how can we engage with our Black student communities, how can we engage with other students of color. And it's also important to realize that the BAME student population in our university is largely international, just because of the demographics of our university. And so for many students, that racism is layered with xenophobia within their classrooms. And I, in the 2 years of being in my role, I was quite visible in terms of my work on international student experience, in terms of my work on anti-racism. And that meant that I engaged with so many students from these communities, and the number of students I had coming to me on a weekly basis with these horrific stories of racism and xenophobia, things their classmates were saying when they were forced to work in groups, things that teachers have said in classrooms are shocking. But the thing is, students don't feel like they want to report it. The reason that a lot of students came to me is because they didn't feel like they could speak to their personal tutors or anyone in their school, and they didn't want to talk to people in the advice department to try and see about reporting this. They didn't trust in the reporting systems because they didn't want to have to go through the experience of sitting down in front of a white person and have to explain their experiences of racism. And this definitely, again, like Yomi said, a lot of this comes in in terms of microaggressions that take place in the university. And I've had to navigate that myself as a student and as a quality and diversity officer. And these are real issues that are not being addressed. And culturally competent mental health care would be a big first step to providing a space that's actually healing for these student and staff communities.
Thank you. I mean, obviously, as a staff member, it's very devastating to hear about these kind of experiences at Queen's, but it's also really important that they are highlighted, and I really appreciate you drawing attention to them and sharing these experiences and challenges. And as you were talking, I was really reminded of, just the need for the centrality of intersectionality in everything that we do, and particularly in higher education, and how often these issues of mental health get siloed into their own domain and therefore shut out the recognition that mental health is going to be impacted by the way you move through the world and the way the world responds to you. And I think that's a really important point to raise. So thank you for that. When you both raised the issue of microaggression and aggression, in fact, in your answers there, and I wanted to talk a little bit about backlash, because whenever people speak out, people receive backlash, and this has been visible over the last few weeks here in Belfast. And to start, I wanted to reflect with you, Yomi, on the Belfast Live's decision to run an article covering the letter from the African Caribbean Society. And so this article was shared. It talked about the letter, the response, and the continued feelings amongst the student body that not enough was being done. And the comments on that article are sometimes violent, often negative. Many are racist. And I wondered how you, Yomi, had processed that and how you had dealt with that, because that must be quite difficult to witness. And I would welcome your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you for asking this question. The first thing I'll say is I think that was my very first time being kind of put in the public eye, and it was quite unfortunate that it was in that way I was put in the public eye. Um, so when I had seen the article, I felt like, the headline, you know, kind of drew attention from what our purpose was. And I must say, and I speak on behalf of the ACS and all Black students in Queens when I say this, is that like we as students, we are not interested in creating racial tensions in the university for any reason. Simply what we've seen is like we've seen. I think the university should see what we're doing as kind of almost like we've seen a gap, we've seen an opening, where that they can fill and they can improve on. And basically, we're just basically suggesting that, or demanding that they do things to make themselves an even better university, if that makes sense. So we're not, so contrary to what, the article might have, contrary to what it might, portray, and we're not, interested in creating racial tension in the university at all. Yeah, but when I saw the comments, I was, a bit scared, a little bit flustered, that people felt this way. And obviously, when you put a headline out like that, people are just going to take the headline and run with it. Not many people would go through the content of the article and read for themselves or find out what the background is. And I just felt like, that article was in a little way taken out of context. And I wish, a bit more context was added in the headline, or the headline kind of portrayed basically what we were trying to do, demanding as students that we be heard and things be done in a better way. So yes, like the comments were, they flustered me a little bit. Obviously, I heard in the comments there's stuff like go back if they're on aid, take them off aid, and stuff like that. Traumatizing stuff, which for a second I thought, me coming back as a student, are people going to be looking at me like some kind of aggressive youth, or and look at me like another aggressive black guy, which is what the stereotypes would normally want to portray you as. That was my initial fear, but then again, I was also of the opinion that this is the media, this is what the media can do, and I'm just confident in the fact that I know I'm not the guy that would probably the article might have kind of in a way portrayed me as kind of a little bit aggressive, I guess, but yeah, that's just my take on it. So, like I said at the beginning, we are nowhere near interested in creating racial tensions. We are their university. We want to live in harmony with everybody. We're not trying to be, aggressive students or come across as, yeah, violent or any way that we might be portrayed or might be seen, basically.
Yeah, and I think it's a real shame that that's even something that you need to say, and it's hard to see the way that aggression can be taken and used against people when they speak out. And as you flagged yourself, particularly when Black people speak about their oppression, this idea that they must be, the aggressive Black person, and this kind of portrayal is really damaging. And yeah, it's a shame that there wasn't more nuance in the conversation online, but hopefully we can, in a small way, use this podcast to encourage people to actually read the letter and engage with the debate in a more meaningful way. Um, Hamza, I follow and very much enjoy your social media presence, and I see that you have also spoken out about having to deal with resistance and bigotry during your time as Equality and Diversity Officer. And I wonder, how did you cope with negative reactions to your work and pushback to your work?
Hmm. I'm gonna be honest here, Rachel. I don't think I coped very well. Um, I I think my whole like social media presence was very much something that was unwelcome by a lot of people, both within and beyond the university. Um, I'm very like aware that in the 2 years that I worked in my role, I was very much a target for abuse from students, from staff, from people beyond the university, for my work within the students union, and it my mental health was ruined. I'm still coming back out of all of that. The amount of abuse that I was subject to, the scrutiny that I was subject to from our own students, and the number of times I found myself having to be, a token at a table, was incredibly dehumanizing. Um, Working on anti-racism within a space as white as Queens was extremely hostile for me. And there was a lot of bigotry and a lot of resistance to my work. Um, and I think I expected that from outside the university, but what shocked me was the amount of backlash that I received from within the university, and the number of times that I was actively silenced, the number of times I've been told that I'm too aggressive in my approach, and it comes back to that, the use of the word aggressive when I speak passionately about issues that matter. um, but yeah, I don't think I necessarily coped with it. I felt a lot of pressure to push on and keep being the person that spoke about these things. But this came very much at the cost of my own mental and physical health, if I have to be completely honest. And I think now that I have stepped down from my role and am completely removed from it all, I can really see how much damage being in that space has done to me. Um, the amount of hatred I've received, the way that students have targeted me, versus any other student officer that holds the same opinions, um, has been vile. And to be honest, it became such a constant thing that I was desensitized to it. Towards the end, there was a student group that was fully harassing me on social media, constantly tweeting vile things about me and misrepresenting me on Twitter, um, for my politics, for my work in anti-racism, and and I honestly was just completely desensitized to it. I didn't completely understand how awful all of that was, because I think the only way I coped was to just remove myself from actually feeling, um you know the pain and the trauma that all of that, you know visibility brought to me.
Yeah. I think, yeah, I mean, that's an entirely natural response to kind of shut down. And I suppose now that you have stepped away, my hope is that there's some space for a bit of self care for you now. I was thinking of Audre Lorde there and how self care can be an act of political warfare in itself. And I hope that that's some warfare that you can engage in now.
Yeah,
um,
I think something that really has come to mind in terms of my reflections now that I'm removed from that space is that, um, and again it comes kind of back to the idea of the Free Black University as well. It's really made me reflect on how change within our university spaces looks like for the people trying to drive that change. The amount of work and time that I put in, um, was so much, and coming out of it after so much of constant attack and scrutiny for everything that I said or did, um, really makes me believe that we do need alternative spaces. We do need spaces where there is a space for people to heal from the racial trauma of doing this work. And that was something that really lacked when I was doing these things within Queens.
yeah. Yeah. I think this is potentially a strange question in light of the conversation that we've just been having, but I'm thinking about our other students that might listen to this episode. And I wonder, a question to both of you is, where might a student that's been experiencing racism or having a hard time seek support. And we've flagged the challenges of accessing institutional support, but whether that's a student body or a student organization or something external entirely, I wonder what you would recommend for a student that might be struggling with these issues.
So, in terms of students coming forward to me over the past 2 years, something that I've really always advised is, because I know a lot of students don't want to access the support services currently available. I obviously do always advise them, use the mental health support services that are available within our university. And so, the Inspire Care hotline, the services offered by Wellbeing in terms of counseling, um, and also obviously using the report and support systems. But I completely understand if students don't feel comfortable using these. But something that I always also include in this advice is telling students to try and join the different clubs and societies that we have. So, for Black students, that's been the ACS being a space where they have a community of students, who understand their experiences, and to help them, find a space within the university so that they are not so isolated in their experiences. And there's lots of different international societies and cultural societies for students with from all these different backgrounds to find a space of other students who have to navigate moving through the university in a similar way.
Yeah, Yomi, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, quite agree with Hamza when she talks about the clubs and societies. But one thing I also want to say, as I'm not an international student, I'll just put that out there. But like for international students that might come to study in Queens, part of the international experience is mixing with other races and other people, and students might want to come in and say mix with the locals and stuff like that. But if they find that there's a bit of a repulse when they're trying to mix with, by default people just go straight back to who they feel they can relate with. So like Hamza said, if there are students out there who are struggling with finding services or places where they can talk about their feelings, or just not just want to talk, I guess, like, yes, the international societies are there and are always open to. Who are we not to be open to talking to people who are looking, who just want to talk. They might not want to tell you about their experiences, but they just want to talk, and they want to feel like they're part of a certain community. And yeah, so like that might be the South Asian society, and that might be the Chinese society, that might be the African Caribbean society. And there's so many societies out there where you can feel part of the community, I guess. Um, but yeah, but we do hope that the university, would meet our demands, and look into how they invest in culturally competent um, well-being services, and as a result, then we can boldly say and signpost students who might be feeling a bit marginalized or a bit um, put to the side. We might be able to signpost them to these services. But yeah, so that would be like my take on the support services that are in the university.
Thank you. Yes, and yeah, as you flagged there, hopefully things will improve as you continue to push, and hopefully as the university takes on your demands and the experiences that you highlighted. Um, One final question, then, perhaps for both of you, is for any student that has listened to this and become interested in these topics, the topic of decolonising institutions, topic of racial equality within higher education, what might one thing be that you would recommend that they either watch or read or listen to? One place to go next, I guess.
Um, so I personally I've been thinking, I think, a lot about both accountability um, and learning for allies, but also just more healing spaces for Black people and people of color at this time. I think there's so many resources that are available right now for, especially for allies, and Black Lives Matter itself has put together reading lists, loads of universities, loads of anti-racist collectives have put together reading lists. I know Abolitionist Futures are doing some fantastic stuff and have been organizing virtual reading groups. So there's a lot that can be easily accessed at the minute, especially in terms of learning, and for Black students, for students of color. I think at the minute healing is so important, especially given the amount of trauma and pain um, that we've all been exposed to at the moment. And so I've really found a lot of refuge in making time to spend time with people um, from similar backgrounds, setting up different reading groups, taking time away from social media, and investing my time in more inspiring conversations, attending webinars by different anti-racist collectives, and just taking the time to learn more myself.
Yeah, thank you. Yomi, what about you? What would you recommend?
For me, my answer might be it's not passive aggressive or anything. Just a disclaimer, but like what I would say is like a simple Google search. Would help a lot. There's so many resources out there, like Hamza said. There's so many things, even on Netflix, that you'd find, like that would like open your eyes to like racism. Like I think there's one called The 13th on Netflix. That's a really good one to watch. It does center on America, but then it makes you realize, oh, this is how deep the issue is. And I'll use a friend of mine for example. She had sent me, so she had not asked me about any books or anything. She had expressed a solidarity with the whole Black Lives Matter movement. But what she has been doing is she's been doing her own research and finding books for herself, and randomly she would screenshot certain pages or stuff like that and send it to me and ask me, is this true? So she's taken it upon herself to do the search herself and find out you know what she needs to find out about the whole issue and educate herself more. So like I said, like a simple like Google search on what specific topics you want to know, maybe racism in a certain country, or books that help you understand colonization or slavery, would definitely go a long way. So that would be my recommendation. I haven't got a vast list of books, from myself, that I can give or just to anyone. Um, but yeah, like the simple Google search, and there are social media pages that are um, dedicated towards educating people about what's going on. One of them that you've probably heard about is Black and Irish. They gained a lot of traction. That's on Instagram, and they are educating people a lot about being Black and Irish, being Black in Ireland, and the history of Black people in Ireland. Another one is Africans soaring in the era. That's another page as well that's dedicated to sharing the stories of Black people in Ireland that I can speak of as well. There's another one for those in the mainland is Black and British. So yeah, there's so many social. If you're, there's so many resources out there that you could find and use to educate oneself.
Thank you both very much. I wonder if there's anything else that you would like to say or that you think we should have covered.
I think I just want to maybe add that, um, you know, I really think that like these conversations are really powerful and important. But what really I just want to see come out of all of this is genuine commitment from Queens. Anyone reading that letter knows how much pain um, was behind that, and that this pain that our students are feeling cannot go on for longer. And I really want to see genuine commitments from the university, want to see genuine investments into hiring BAME staff to work in these areas of decolonization, and looking into the mental health and investigating the payment attainment gap, and also just using the language that we're using would be so powerful. It was disappointing for me to see the Vice Chancellor opt to use words like diversity instead of decolonize, um, opting to look at progression rates instead of attainment gap. And so, actually tangibly looking at the issues that have been raised instead of opting for more institutional or corporate approaches towards this, um, for me would be really powerful. And moving on from Queens, I think I'd really like to see that future generations of students would never have to um, endure the experiences of racism that I myself have experienced firsthand, and that we've seen raised again in the ACS letter.
Thank you, Hamza. Yomi, do you have any last thoughts?
Yeah, so I just want to say the whole issue should not be seen. I don't think it should be seen as a burden. For anybody that's seen it as a burden. If anything, I think for the university, it should be seen as an opportunity to improve. Basically, an opportunity to improve, and that's all. And like Hamza, we'd be happy to see, real change and real commitment to change. I want to be able to, I don't want to be able to, I don't want to have to brush off the question of, oh, I'm thinking of, if someone comes to me and asks, oh, I'm thinking of coming to Queens, what do you think about the diversity in Queens? I don't want to have to brush that conversation under the rug. I want to be able to boldly say that, oh yes, Queens has in the last, few years or few months committed to, handling race differently and improve the race relations, improving the race relation issues more. So I just want to be able to, as a student who will graduate from Queens next year, I want to be able to say, yeah, in this time, Queens has actually really made some real commitments to change in terms of how they handle race. So yes, that's basically what I have to say.
Thank you. Yeah, and I like your framing there as this is not to be seen as something that's burdensome, but really as an opportunity to improve and an opportunity for institutional growth. So thank you for that. I just want to thank you both for your candor and openness in this conversation, and for sharing something of your experiences, which have been painful, but also your important work on tackling racism and white supremacy at Queen's. It's been great to listen to you both. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having me as well.
Thank you. So you have been listening to LawPod. This is an informed take on current events brought to you by the staff and students at the School of Law at Queen's University, Belfast. This episode was produced by Richard Somerville. Our theme music is by Colonel Chocolate and the Justice Triangle, and LawPod is funded by the Queen's University Law School. Thank you to my guests today, Oluwayomi Olaide-Kolapo and Hamsavani Rajeswaren. You can follow us on Twitter at QUB LawPod. For more information, you can also visit our website, lawpod.org, and we will include some information in the show notes today and some sources that were mentioned throughout the episode, so you can find them there. You can also find us on iTunes and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Thank you for listening. I'm Rachel Colleen, and this was LawPod.